In 1949, an act was made by Harry Truman saying that all waterplanes would be banned in the BWCA. Then in 1964, Hubert Humphrey's Wilderness Bill was passed. The Wilderness Bill was created to help protect the boundary waters from mining and logging. This also caused an uproar from miners, loggers, and resort owners in the BWCA. In 1940, loggers were producing 9.1 million feet of board. 5 years later, in 1945, the board volume increased to 45 million feet of board being produced. Finally, in 1952, the board production increased 97.5 million feet. In 1949, President Harry Truman declared that waterplanes were no longer allowed in the boundary waters. The result of this was that resort owners had to find a different way to transport guests to their lodge. In 1960, Senator Hubert Humphrey suggested the Wilderness Bill. Later in 1964, Humphrey's bill was finally passed. The inspiration for the Wilderness Bill came from two of his friends, Sigurd F. Olson and William Magee. Olson was the author of several books that were about the boundary waters that touched people in many different ways.
I think that he would like the circle to be bigger, and he wouldn't like to know that it's still to this day, maybe even more so, that it's such a struggle to get people to be aware of the value of wilderness. He really firmly believed that the more people we get out here, of course they'll want to protect it and save it.
In 1964, President Johnson signed a wilderness preservation law system that included the BWCA. That same year, the government started to buy land so they could turn it into wilderness, and already started to make resort owners leave. After resort owners left, the government would either burn the resort building or take it somewhere else, but most of the time, the resort building was burned. The government encountered two people who refused to leave. They were Dorothy Moulter and Benny Ambrose. They never accepted offers from the government for their land. Ambrose, a World War I veteran, would only have to take one look at the uniformed personnel employed by the U.S. Forest Service, and Ambrose would yell, "You go tell your boss I've got a loaded .30-30 Winchester sitting in the corner of this cabin. The next person in uniform steps on my dock is going to get blown into the lake." When the U.S. Forest Service gave Moulter an offer, she showed little interest in every offer that was made. When the Wilderness Act was enforced, that meant everyone had to move out, but Moulter and Ambrose still refused to leave. The government let Moulter and Ambrose stay until 1975 to avoid going to court and assuming that they weren't going to live much longer. 11 years later, Moulter and Ambrose were still living and still refusing to move. To avoid going to court, the government explored a compromise with these two residents and eventually granting them lifetime permission for Moulter and Ambrose. In 1982, Ambrose died, making Moulter the last resident. In 1984, there was another addition to the Wilderness Act. Snowmobiles and motorboats would be banned as well now. December 14, 1986, no radio contact was made from Moulter to the Kawishue Ranger Office. People at the office assumed that she was too busy or simply didn't put in a fresh pair of batteries. On December 17th, they became concerned about her. Jim Hines brought United States Forest Service pilot Doug Bowman along with him to check on Moulter, but it was beginning to ice up and wasn't able to land. The next day, the two men were accompanied by Jerry Juslia. Flying over her cabin, they noticed something odd. There was no smoke coming out of the chimney, and there weren't snowshoe tracks. When they entered her cabin, they found her lying on the floor, dead. She had been living at the Isle of the Pines for over 56 years. A trained nurse, a strong, independent woman, and her signature saying, "Quit your belly aching." From her case of stay to her homemade root beer, she is forever known as the Root Beer Lady. After dismantling Moulter's cabin piece by piece, the people of Ely moved the cabin to Ely, Minnesota by snowmobile and dog sled. There are no longer anyone living in the boundary waters anymore. There are only wild animals and campers. In 1978, a fourth of the area in the BWCA opened up to motorized vehicles, but the motorized vehicles could only stay in the authorized area. In 1982, Sigurd F. Olsen dropped dead while snowshoeing by his house. In 1990, the government had most of the boundary waters tested for mercury. After seeing that it was polluted with mercury, the government found the source of the pollution, a coal-burning factory. It was the air toxins that was polluting the water, so the government decided to pass a new bill called Clean Air Act. However, this bill failed to pass. In 1999, a huge storm knocked over 300,000 acres of trees in the boundary waters. These days there are fierce debates over mining, sulfide mining. Even today's technology there can be a slip-up, and sulfuric acid can be devastating to wildlife such as fish and moose. The BWCA's waters are actually some of the cleanest waters in America, seeing how there aren't any trash bins lying around that you can throw your trash in, and that you have to carry your trash with you. To help save the boundary waters, Dave and Amy Freeman are spending a year in the boundary waters from September 23rd, 2015 to September 23rd, 2016. But the boundary waters is not the only body of water that is endangered. Lake Vermilion is another body of water that is endangered. If people want to help save the boundary waters, they can go to Ely, Minnesota and sign a canoe, or go online to www.savetheboundarywaters.org, or sign the pension. If people want to donate money, they can do that also.